Welcome to the lecture for Research Methods. We'll be talking today about needs assessment and program evaluation. So what we're talking about here is the intersection of research and program planning. And when we do that, we're talking about doing applied research, where you're looking to apply your findings to answer a specific question, solve a specific problem, as opposed to basic research, wherein you're still interested in solving problems, but there you're looking to create knowledge that's generalizable beyond your study. So if you're doing program planning, looking to see about something about the needs of substance users in your area, or if your particular program is effective, you really are interested in just the people in your area and just your program. So some of the concerns we have when designing other types of research about generalizability, well, will this generalize to other programs? Not as relevant here when you're doing this type of applied research, this particular type of applied research, because you really are just looking at your particular program, your particular population of interest. But this type of research is still research, and therefore it is a systematic gathering and analysis of information, which makes it different from other things you may think about related to needs assessment, program evaluation, or program planning, where you imagine people just sitting around in meetings talking about, well, I think we're doing a good job, which some of that happens, but really this is distinct in terms of the systematic approach that's applied to both coming up with questions and then finding the answers to those questions. So again, the two types we'll talk about, the first is needs assessment, and this is where you're looking to identify discrepancies, gaps, or deficiencies, where you have usually some targeted population and you want to know, it could be geographic, people in this area, it could be people with a particular need or that face a particular difficulty, say individuals who are homeless, victims of domestic violence, and you want to know what are their needs, and especially if you're in charge of running a program, you may be doing this type of needs assessment, what needs that our program might be able to serve aren't being met. So what should be happening for people, what should be provided, and what's not being provided? Where's that gap between what should happen and what is happening? And needs assessments typically are conducted whenever you're trying to determine if a new program is needed. Well, okay, maybe we need a new program to stop bullying. There's lots of press about bullying in schools. Do we need an anti-bullying program? I don't know. Let's do a needs assessment. And also if there's maybe a need for changing a program. And this could be because something's happening in the community and there's an existing program and you may feel it is no longer meeting the needs of those people, or more often you have a program and all of a sudden there's a chance for that program to grow. They can get a grant or some legislation may be passed to increase their funding, and so to justify getting money to do more, you have to do a needs assessment to show that more needs to be done. The other aspect of applying research to program planning is program evaluation, and this is where we're going to look at how we examine the processes and or the outcomes of programs that are designed to meet particular needs. So as you can imagine, these two things often go hand in hand, where often needs assessments precede the development of a program, and then program evaluation is at the beginning, middle, and end of a program, and then also you may always need to conduct a new needs assessment, which often gets rolled into ongoing program evaluation. But we'll talk about them separately a bit, starting with needs assessment. First, looking at how need is defined. Bradshaw defined a couple different types of need, looking at normative needs, and this isn't quite what it sounds like. You're not necessarily looking at normative data, but really normative needs are those where you're relying on expert opinion for what's needed, and the expert opinion is assumed to be informed by research. An example would be the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that kids sit in rear-facing seats till the age of 2 years now, right? So that would be a normative need. Okay, kids need to be in rear-facing seats till age of 2. How do we know that? Well, because some experts said that needed to happen. Why did they say that? Well, based on some research that that committee read. There's a felt need, right? So this is what the clients, the consumers, the targets, however you want to think about that population you're interested in, what they say they need. Often this is based on surveys, interviews, etc. Important thing to remember was whenever you're trying to assess a felt need, people will often express it in terms of solutions rather than needs. So they may say something like, "Well, we need more beds in the homeless shelter." Okay, well, that's what you think the solution is to a problem, whereas the real need is, well, we need to provide safe housing for the homeless. And that's one solution, is having more beds in that shelter. Another solution would be to build another shelter. Right? So you have to sometimes distinguish between the two. And when you assess a felt need, it may, even though it may be valid, yes, they feel they want that, but it may tell you about something else. It may tell you about more about a solution which is related to a need rather than directly telling you what the need is. Express need is something you infer based on the demand for a service. So this is where you're looking at things like waiting list for services. So there's this huge waiting list for low-income housing. Okay, that shows that there is an express need for that type of housing. And again, this may indicate, okay, there's lots of people that have this need, or it may indicate that whatever program is currently designed to meet that need just isn't being very efficient. So it may not be an unreasonable number of people, it's just what you're doing isn't working. Either way, it's a need that has to be addressed or needs to be addressed. Comparative need. This is where, this is more what I would think of when I hear normative need. This is where you're looking at data in similar other populations regarding the level of need. So somebody else has done a needs assessment somewhere else, and they say, okay, well, 14% of the aged population is in need of transportation. Okay, they found that in New York. Okay, then we're going to need that here. And that can be very helpful, but it can also be misleading if the population that you're comparing yours to is too dissimilar in important ways. Imagine trying to find a population that's highly similar to the one in Killeen. It's a pretty unique population with Fort Hood being there and being in Central Texas. Not many good comparison populations out there. Kind of what I alluded to a little bit earlier when talking about felt need, is it can be hard sometimes to get at, well, what is the need versus what do you think the solution is, or even what do you want to happen? So one approach to trying to get more to what the actual need is instead of asking people what they need, ask them two other questions and calculate the need based on their answers. Ask them, what should be happening in terms of this thing? So how many people do you think we should be providing food to? How many kids should be coming to school hungry? And then we ask, what is actually happening? How many people are we feeding? And then you subtract the difference, and whatever the shortfall is from what should be happening and compared to what is, well, that tells you what the need is. And looking at these different types of needs and the difficulty determining the difference between solution, want, and need, it shouldn't be a surprise that when doing needs assessment, you often have to rely on a multi-method, multi-source approach, right? Because there's so many different ways of defining need um, that it's important to use a variety of perspectives and looking at those perspectives a variety of ways to determine what that true need is amid all the noise of all the idiosyncratic differences among people and methods. Okay, so what are the steps in needs assessment? First, identify the relevant parameters. So you want to establish what the purpose of the needs assessment is, and can often be a very complex process, so it's important to keep that purpose in the forefront of your mind, or it's easy to get sidetracked. Oh yeah, why are we? You start looking at stuff, oh, here's another interesting question. And if you're in charge of it, you need to say, yeah, that is an interesting question, but our purpose is to see if this population has a need related to this issue. Right? You got to think about the level of the needs assessment you're going to look at. Are you looking at a particular neighborhood, city, county, state, region? Right? You have to make those decisions early on. You need to identify the key stakeholders. So these are the people that will be affected by any decisions made based on the needs assessment, people that will have power to make decisions, so people that are potential funders of programs, administrators of programs, politicians, service providers, community members, other overlapping or similar programs, local businesses, And then of course the clients who are in need, and that includes current clients, past clients, and also potential clients. So you need to identify who those people are because you're likely going to be needing to get data from them for your needs assessment. Okay, related to that in step 2, determining what information is needed. So what do we need to know? Because there's a ton of information out there, and as you start doing it, you'll come up with all sorts of questions and interesting facts, data you could find. But you have to kind of limit yourself and think, okay, what information will be useful to the purpose of the assessment? So say keep that purpose at the forefront of your mind. Otherwise, you'll easily get distracted. Right? So, for example, imagine you want to know about the needs of parents with children who've been diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. Right? Someone you're working in committee, of course. Someone might say, it might be useful to know what kinds of student loan programs are available to these parents. Yeah, it might be, but that's probably not going to be a top priority compared to the other things you're interested in. If you're interested in mainly what are the needs of these parents in terms of providing services to the kids. Okay. At this step of the needs assessment is really where uh, there's a chance for subjectivity to creep into your research, right? Because once you're designing your methods and your surveys and you're gathering the data, you can be very objective and methodical. But when you're picking what things to ask and how to ask them, it's real easy to, if you have a particular agenda or something in mind how you think the answer should come, to influence it even unknowingly. And that's why it's really important to involve a diverse group of stakeholders at this stage of planning. Um, and when you do that, the other thing you need to be mindful of, because it's helpful to include that diverse group, but you don't want to succumb to any kind of maladaptive group processes like groupthink, where okay, it's so important that we come to consensus, we're going to make some bad decisions. So you need to be mindful of all the stuff you've learned about group processes when doing this and apply those skills as well. And again, this stage of doing the needs assessment is probably the most important. This is the one you need to get right. Because if this part gets botched, then the whole train is off the rails. You need to spend as much time and energy as needed to get this right, with as much input from diverse sources as this requires. A huge key to success here is strong leadership. Uh, Someone or some people must be able to put it all together and ultimately find some consensus that's true to the purpose of the assessment. And that may be your job if you're the lead on a needs assessment. Third step, uh, once you've identified what information is needed, you need to figure out, well, what's out there already, so what's existent, and then what's obtainable. And there may be a situation that you just can't get due to limited resources or maybe the nature of the information. So when we talk about information that is in existence, we're probably talking about secondary data that have been collected already by somebody else, quite often, for some other purpose. This is often referred to as secondary data. An example would be census data. And a lot of the things that are included in secondary data are things that are referred to in this literature as social indicators. Um, and this is the information often gathered by government agencies related to things about population size and composition, health, so death rates, suicide rates, birth rates, housing, number of new first-time homeowners in the past year, education, employment, so the unemployment rate, things like that. You can often find those social indicators if you just look to the right government agency. Okay, the next step, you're going to be designing your methodology and instrumentation. So here, again, you may be relying a lot on some just secondary data analysis. So finding some data from some other source, analyzing, well, that's usually pretty easy. But the thing you need to pay attention to is you need to make sure that you can get access to the data in a format that's usable. And usually I recommend trying to get it in raw form. So if they say, oh yeah, we can give you our report that we ran about housing in the community, that'd be great, but wouldn't it be even better if you could give me the raw data? I could see it myself. Because whenever they run their report, they may combine data in a way that is not helpful to you, and you may not be able to find information about a particular subpopulation that, if you had the raw data, you could parse that out. Of course, surveys, common method in a lot of research, um, and it's essential here to be able to identify which stakeholder category each participant falls into that you're getting information from. And along those same lines, you need to be thinking about your sampling method. Will you get data from people that you will you get the data from the people that you need to get it from? Right? So if you're doing a survey gathering information about needs of the homeless, if you do an online survey and you're recruiting people by posting stuff on Facebook, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of homeless individuals participating. Right? Also, when doing surveys, especially for needs assessment, which are often kind of large-scale surveys, always, always, always do a pilot test first. Because when you're creating a survey, the questions often make very good sense to you because you wrote them, but they may not always make sense to somebody else. People may answer them in kind of odd, goofy ways that you can't anticipate until you actually give it to people. So you give it to a small group, see if the survey seems to be behaving where people are clearly understanding it and they're answering the way you want them to. So you put sex and with a blank, and some people put male, some put female, some people put yes. Okay, well, you're going to need to change that question, right? Because it's not behaving the way you need it to if you're wanting to know what people's biological sex is. Other methods, interviews, and these can range from kind of informal and unstructured to semi-structured to very structured, where I'm going to ask this, and then this, and then this, or even kind of branching interviews where I'm going to ask this. If they answer A, I go to this question. If they answer B, I go to this question. Just depending on what exactly you're interested in will influence what type of interview you do. A technique that you may not be familiar with would be the use of nominal groups. And this is where you get a small group of people and you first ask them to individually brainstorm ideas about a problem. And this may be what's needed, what they think exists currently, what they think about the effectiveness or efficiency of a solution. Then you go around kind of this round robin one at a time, and they take turns sharing an idea one at a time. And these are written on a chalkboard, marker board. And in a group, they discuss uh, the ideas and rate them, maybe eliminate some, maybe combine some, maybe add some new ones. And then each person ranks top 5 anonymously, and you compile these results. And the group looks at the rankings. The group discusses the rankings, discusses, well, I thought this was high, I thought this was low. And then at the end, each person, again, independently rates each of these ideas. So that's one approach that seems to me to be somewhat unique to this field. Another one that you may not be familiar with would be the Delphi technique. And this is where you give a questionnaire to key informants. And key informants are usually the people working with the population in need, either service providers or administrators that are in charge of the service providers, or maybe even other experts, and you're going to be soliciting their ideas. What do you think about this need? What do you think about this problem? And you just send out the questionnaire, you get the data back. If there are areas of disagreement among them, you design a second questionnaire to address these. Some people have said this, other people have said this. What do you think? And then you distribute it back to that same group of folks. And then you just continue this process until general consensus is reached. Finally, focus groups would be another method. Typically, you get 6 to 8 people involved in a structured discussion where you have a moderator who's going to be probing and asking clarifying questions to identify both commonalities among the group and then also things that may be unique to different members in terms of problems they're facing, their needs, their strengths, resources that they're aware of. Okay, and this isn't all the methods that you might see doing a needs assessment. This is just a list of some of the more. Okay, then you're going to, of course, collect and analyze the data. And when you're collecting it, it may be online surveys, um, phone surveys, face-to-face surveys or interviews, some archival, which is that secondary data, gathering of information, which just involves doing lots of paperwork. You're probably going to use a combination of both qualitative and quantitative methods. And when you do that, you call it mixed methods research. That's a more common in this type of research than many others because you really do need both. And then you're going to prepare a report, likely going to have multiple drafts and revisions because you're going to have a lot of cooks in the kitchen when doing a needs assessment, lots of stakeholders who are going to be involved, and people with different agendas about what they think the data mean. But somebody's going to have to be in charge ultimately of saying, yes, this is the final report we're going to go forward with. And right before you get to that final report, you disseminate your results out to the key stakeholders for feedback. And this is partially to make sure that it's understandable, it's presented well, and that it's actionable. But it's also to get buy-in, right? So if you're going to have this report about the needs of the community, you're going to want to give it to your local bigwig politician first, so she or he can see it first, and they're kind of in on it, and they are kind of part of the process before it goes to the public. Then they're less likely to react against it if they think it's something that they have a hand in, they have a role in, and maybe they can even probably take credit for. And of course, at the end, you will formally disseminate your results, usually with just a written report of over 100 pages or so. Okay, moving on to program evaluation. Uh, First, what do we mean by a program? Well, it's a pretty broad category. It's anything that involves an organized collection of activities designed for some objective. Right? So you could have stuff like the clinical mental health program at the university, or the community and family counseling center. That's a program. Student counseling services. That's a program. Psychi, the Honor Society, is a program. As long as there's some objective and there's some activities, uh, it can be considered a program, and you could do program evaluation on it. So what type of evaluation are we talking about? What are we going to be evaluating of this collection of activities? Well, we'll be looking at a formative evaluation, and this is used when a program is just starting off, just forming, right? A program may have some things in place, but it's not done forming yet, and they've probably never been evaluated before. And this may also apply when a program undergoes a significant change. It may look like you're doing a formative program evaluation as well. Uh, there's process evaluation. We're looking at the processes. What are you actually doing in the program? What have you done? Things like how many clients have you served? How many sessions have been offered? What's the no-show rate? How much is it costing? And this type of thing is often used for ongoing monitoring of a program. So if you want to know, are we still doing what we said we were going to do when we first started doing this thing? So that's one type of program evaluation. The type you probably think about the most would be outcome evaluation. And this is where you're looking at the immediate outcome of a program. So how many clients finished the treatment program and were abstinent at 30 days? So kind of this proximal to concluding the program, what was the outcome? What did they learn? What did they do? How are they different? And then you may think even beyond that, when we think about, instead of saying long-term outcome, we say impact evaluation. So, but all that is longer-term outcomes. So with a drug rehab program, instead of looking at how many of those people are abstinent from drugs 30 days later, we look at how have recidivism rates among drug offenders in the area changed since the implementation of this program. Right? So that's something if the program is working and they're staying clean, then there should be less people that were convicted of drug crimes going back into prison for drug crimes again. Right? So you change them, and then we can see this longer impact. And you can see, and these aren't necessarily, oh, I'm going to do this one or this one. You can do bits of all of these at once. So formative, really only if it's new or there's a big change. But even when doing formative, you can look at the processes. You're looking at, okay, what are the immediate outcomes, and then you may or may not have impact data yet for formative, but otherwise you can combine process, outcome, and impact. And one more key point about program evaluation is I just want to kind of reiterate, kind of like with needs assessment, uh, the importance of stakeholder involvement throughout the entire process. From before you even start collecting data, before you figure out what questions you want, reaching out to stakeholders, seeing who's going to be on board, who's going to be invested, who's going to be supportive, who's going to be suspicious, and then as you're doing it, of course, helping to mold what questions you ask, how you ask them, helping you probably with resources and access to populations, and then at the end, sharing the information with those stakeholders as well. Important for any program evaluation that's going to be worth doing. Okay, so why do program evaluation? Lots of reasons. Sometimes it's required by some funding agency. Okay, so we gave you this money to conduct this program. Now show us what you're doing or show us that it works. Otherwise, we're not going to give you any more money. Related to that, you may be not a particular agency, but just in general, there are limited funds and resources for programs, especially social services programs, and so there's competition for those funds. So we think this population we serve has a big need, and we think we're meeting it, we're being effective, and we want to be able to show people that we're being effective with these people, having good outcomes, and often even more so, that we're having these huge, big, important impacts for the community, and therefore we should get more of the grant money, legislative money, whatever it is. Also, whenever you have innovation interventions, whenever you do something new, we need to evaluate, okay, now that we're doing it this new way, is it better, worse, or the same as the way we used to do it? You might be doing a program evaluation in response to a needs assessment. So you started off, hey, I think there's this problem. We do a needs assessment. Yep, here's the problem. Here's the need. They need this, this, and this. Okay, well then let's do a formative program evaluation, get some stuff started, and see if we can start figuring out how to meet those needs. Um, and then the last one, just in terms of professional ethics, if you're going to have any kind of program that is social service in any way, where you're out to, where the goal, your mission is to help people, if you're working under the guise of mental health especially, then it's incumbent upon you to use empirically supported interventions. Right? Otherwise, you might just be a quack doing stuff that, oh, this feels like it should be good. No, our practice should be based on science. And that doesn't mean that it has to be based on, science that's been published in some journal, right? If you're doing something that nobody's ever done before, maybe there's no way to say, okay, no literature to point to. So you create it yourself. And it doesn't even have to be published as long as it's done empirically, right? If you're doing it well, you're doing good program evaluation, and you have data to support that, yes, what I'm doing is effective and efficient and efficacious, then you're practicing ethically. Okay, so what are the steps in program evaluation? The first one's a big one. You need to determine the focus of the evaluation. And this often starts by working collaboratively with the program coordinators to identify what their logic model is. Lots of different ways to specify a logic model. The most basic would be what do they put into the program, what do they do, and what do they get out. This is just a slightly more elaborate one. We look at what do they put in, so their inputs, their resources, which allow them to do certain activities. So what are the activities they're doing with typically some population? Based on those activities, what are the outputs? So they did the activity, now they're different this way, right? And that leads to some outcome or outcomes. And then because of those outcomes, there are even more distal outcomes, which we refer to as the impact. One example would be if you looked at teaching a breastfeeding class. So the inputs would be the staff, the space that you're using to provide it, and probably lots of other stuff, but at least that. The activity it allows would be teaching the breastfeeding class, for expectant mothers. The immediate output that you would hope for, that you would expect, would be that expectant mothers increase their knowledge of breastfeeding, how to do it, the benefits, all that stuff. And then because of that output, because they now know this, the outcome that you're hoping is that those expectant mothers will then eventually breastfeed their kids for the first 6 months of life, at least. And then the impact of that's looking even more distantly into the future would be that those children will reach appropriate developmental milestones at 12 months of age. So you need to identify that logic model because it helps you identify um, what they're putting into it. So what are their resources? What is it they're doing? What are their processes? And then what do they hope happens as a result? What are their goals and objectives, both immediately, a little down the road, and then even more down the road? Because that's going to help you identify what needs to be evaluated. Also, in terms of determining the focus of the evaluation, uh, it's important to get a clear idea of the purpose of that evaluation. Be clear why it's occurring. Is it formative? Is it a new program or following some big change? Are you doing it because the program wants to improve what they're doing? Is it because they need to justify to somebody that they're doing a good job or so they can get paid? You need to know why you're getting information because that will heavily influence what information you need to look for. You need to identify both the scope of your evaluation and the limitations. So are you looking at, if you're looking at let's say the psychology and counseling department as a program, are you looking at that entire department? Are you looking at just some programs within it? Are you looking at just undergrad, just grad? Are you looking at classroom stuff? Are you looking at service-based learning? What is it you're looking at? How far reaching? And then also what limitations are there in terms of what are the resources you have to do the evaluation in terms of time, money, and personnel? Those things need to be figured out on the front end. And then another one people might always think about is what's the anticipated use? Who might use the data you generate? What is it they would want to know? And how might they use those results? And this usually is, you have to think of multiple stakeholders in terms of who might use the data. One might be the program itself, right? And they might want to know, our clients getting better that we serve. And then how would they use the results? Well, they would use them to maybe improve service delivery. They say, okay, well, we want to know what we can do better to serve clients. Okay, we realize that um, we're having lots of no-shows, and that's related to the fact that we don't have somebody taking phone calls after 3 o'clock on Wednesday, whatever it is. Right? So that's what they would do. But there might also be some administrators that want to know about this, the results of your evaluation, and they might be more interested in um, instead of are people getting better. So let's say maybe it's like in the clinic we have a contract with probation, so we're serving these probation clients. Maybe some administrators wanting to know, okay, are these people that you're seeing for counseling, these probationers, are they finishing probation and not coming back into the system, right? So they don't want to know, are they getting better in terms of mental health? They just want to know, are they getting better in terms of not coming back into the probation system? And what are they going to do with the results? Well, they may use it to justify continuing to pay for your program. Okay. So important to identify all those different potential stakeholders who might use the data and think about what they would want to know and how they might use the results. Still in that first step of determining the focus, you'll be thinking about what kind of questions to consider, and it somewhat depends about your purpose. There'll be questions about outcome or impact. An example would be, what do people do differently after involvement in our program? Questions about the processes, if it's more of a process-focused thing you're doing. Well, what types of clients engage in what types of activities in our program? There might be questions about the context of your service delivery. So are there other agencies out there that offer similar or duplicative services? Or maybe it's even something related to needs of the program. So, are there local assets out there that can be built upon that maybe we're underutilizing, that we could, serve people better if we were making better use of those things? And as you begin to develop those questions, you're more than likely going to need to clarify your questions. Because often when you come up with a question, you find that you need several smaller sub-questions to answer the larger questions. An example would be that one about, are there other programs duplicating efforts of our program? Well, first you got to know, well, what activities are involved in what we do? Okay, now we look at what other similar programs exist. What activities do they do? Now, how are the activities similar, dissimilar? How are they complementary? Do clients have equal access to activities in both of these types of programs? What's unique about our program and our activities? So those are all sub-questions that come off of that one bigger question. So it's this kind of ongoing iterative process. And then eventually, probably the hardest part is you need to identify relevant indicators, right? And these are your operational definitions of objectives. So for your outcomes, your impacts, what you think you're doing, short term, middle term, long term, how do you know you're doing that? So you say, oh, we think people will learn more. Well, how do you know if they've learned more? Did you give them a test? Is there some way that they'll behave differently if they've learned versus if they haven't learned? Um, so you've got to think often very creatively about that in terms of how will they be different and how can we tell? How could we possibly measure that? Thinking both proximally, so immediately, and more distally, further down the road, how can we tell if they've really changed? Okay, once you've got your focus, you figured it out, you got your questions, now you need to collect data. Uh, Quite often you need kind of one person overseeing the whole process. Again, you need some strong leadership because program evaluation can be this huge thing where you have basically several different little research projects going on at once, right? So there's a survey going here, there's focus groups going here, there's interviews going here, and you need somebody kind of supervising the whole thing to make sure that it's all feeding into the same process and that the data are being collected in a way that they can be merged at the end to answer the questions that need to be answered. In terms of what data are you gathering, well, you're gathering stuff about the resources, the inputs, right? So what's being put in. You're gathering data about the activities, what are they doing, and then you're gathering those indicators of all the outcomes and impacts and all that sort of stuff. And similar to needs assessment, you're probably going to be doing mixed methods where you're using both qualitative and quantitative data because it gives you the richest, most complete picture of any kind of complex process. You're probably going to take advantage of existing information as much as possible. Again, that's talking about secondary data. And when you're collecting data, again, you need to be mindful of sampling considerations. So if we're looking at the effectiveness of a program, we want to look at, of course, people that completed the program, but we don't want to just look at completers. We also want to get data from those that maybe expressed interest but didn't ever start the program, or people that started but didn't finish it, and then also people that we think would benefit from the program, but for some reason never even heard about it, right? So you've got to cast a wide net, but not just everybody in the city, in the county, in the state. You need to identify specifically what types of populations do you need information from. Who are the relevant populations you're interested in, and it's something to be very thoughtful of, so you don't waste your time collecting data that you don't need, but also so you don't miss out saying, well, geez, you asked these questions of all these people, what about this group? You didn't get their opinion. Where's their input? You don't want to have those holes. And then, of course, you're going to analyze the data, quantitative data. You're going to be using, parametric and non-parametric statistics, most likely more parametric. For your qualitative data, you can use some fancy software nowadays more so, that does a lot of the stuff for you, where you're looking at uh, similar words that reflect themes being grouped together. Or you can do it kind of the old school, old-fashioned way, where you have these piles of paper, results from interviews, focus groups, whatever, and you pour through looking for patterns and use sticky notes and note cards, and you can take a whole class on how to learn how to do that. Okay. After you've analyzed the data, you need to obviously interpret the data, and any interpretations you make need to be clearly connected to the data. You don't want to have this gap between, okay, here's what we found, here's what I think it means. You don't want that to be a big gap. You want it to be the smallest gap as possible, where you can always easily defend your interpretations. Well, here's why I think this, because these numbers and these themes that emerge from these words these people said. You want to get feedback on your interpretations before making them public. You want to make sure that it is accurate, for one, that it makes sense to people, and that you don't have any kind of blind spot. Again, this is where I talk about involving those stakeholders throughout the process, even as you get toward the end. Okay, here's what we think we found. Does this make sense to you? And then part of your interpretation will also be identifying recommendations, right? Because there's no point doing any program evaluation unless the end result is something actionable. And it doesn't mean that you have to say, okay, for every program evaluation I do, I've got to say, here, change this. If a program is working perfectly, then that's fine. That should still be a recommendation. If this is working perfectly, don't change a thing. That's probably not going to happen too often, right? Because people could always do something better. It may be that they're doing the best they can with what they have, and your recommendation is, okay, these people need more resources because there's a need here that's not being met, and they can't meet it with what they've got. They're doing the best they can. They're at 100% capacity, but they could meet the need if they could see 13% more clients. They need another $5 million a year, right? So there need to be some recommendations tied to those interpretations, some action that's going to happen. And then, of course, at the end, you're going to report your results. Okay, last thing, a couple of practical, pragmatic issues involved with program evaluation. One, concerns about treatment fidelity. When you're evaluating a program, and let's say you find that it doesn't work. It doesn't work, geez, that's weird, because based on the previous research, theory, this should have worked. Why didn't it work? Well, it may be because there was a lack of treatment fidelity in terms of people said they were doing a certain thing. Okay, yeah, we see these clients for this many sessions for this long, and we do this type of therapy. And you say, okay, thank you for that data, I'll trust you, but they weren't doing that. Either they didn't do the full sessions, they didn't follow the manual, they just went off and did their own thing. If they did that, there's lacking treatment fidelity. They're not doing what they say they're doing. So when you say, oh, this thing doesn't work, well, you're saying whatever it is they're doing doesn't work, but if you don't, usually you assume they're telling you the truth, so you say, okay, this program doesn't work, which it could have worked if they'd really been doing it. And that's why you don't want to, I think, focus solely on outcome evaluation. There needs to be some process evaluation. You need to be evaluating the activities. What is it they're really doing? And not just have them list it for you, but collect data to verify treatment fidelity, verify that they are doing it. In the absence of being able to do that, at least look for some indicators of the presence of treatment fidelity. So, are there clear policies where, okay, this is what we say we're doing. Does everybody know that? Like, so does everybody get an orientation where they learn what the goals of the program are and what they're supposed to be doing? Are there reminders about that? Or is it, oh, they get a training once and then they go off and do their own thing? Well, if that's the case, there's probably people doing 20 different things all over the program. Another thing, the political nature of evaluation. Ideally, you could just go be a good scientist, right, and collect data and make recommendations. People would thank you for it. It doesn't typically happen, right? We talked about the stakeholders. There's lots of different stakeholders, and they'll likely have different motivations, different things they want, different expectations regarding the outcome and use of your work. So you need to be sensitive to the fact that political influences could kind of cloud or obscure the truth when you're collecting data. People may not tell you what really is. They may tell you what they think you want to hear or what they need you to hear. So you want to use as much hard data as possible, data that you're not collecting from people that have a strong vested interest in the outcome of your research. Uh, you want to, when you agree to do a program evaluation, uh, make sure you get a contract that assures you with some level of independence, where people aren't going to be monkeying around and telling you, oh no, you can't ask that question, that'll make us look bad. Or, oh, you found that? No, you can't tell people that, that'll make us look bad. Here, ask these questions, this will make us look good. You don't want to put yourself in that situation, so just be aware that it's out there, and people won't typically be obvious about it, but they may be more subtly trying to influence the outcome, and you need to be able to find truth the best that you can. Another thing that can kind of distort your evaluation is just the threat of evaluation, right? People are often scared that they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose their funding for their program when they're being evaluated, especially if you're coming in as an outside evaluator. Not a whole lot you can do about this other than to be clear about your purpose, about your commitment to objectivity, and the absence of any kind of evil agenda on your part. Well, of course, you're going to acknowledge any kind of legitimate concerns they have. Like, so if you're there because there's budget cuts coming down in government agencies, so you kind of have to acknowledge, yeah, they're cutting down, they're looking trim fat. You know, you guys sure seem to be believe you're doing good work, and if that's what's going on, then it's going to shine through in the data, because I have no personal interest in showing that you're not doing good work. I just want to show what you're doing. And then you may get them to be more open to you, but just be aware that they may not be fully open if they're scared. Last, culturally sensitive evaluations. It's an important thing to be mindful of in whatever you do, in that people from diverse cultures may see the world, see interactions differently than each other, and that any kind of assumptions you have about the world are often culturally rooted. So whenever possible, you want to use as diverse an assessment team as possible, right? And also ensure the diversity of stakeholders that are being consulted is representative of the population. Right? And last one, whenever language barriers may impact data collection or dissemination of results, make sure and take appropriate steps. And what are appropriate steps? Depends on what you're doing. It may be simply getting a translator. If you're using some sort of standardized assessment instrument, it may be determining if that instrument comes in another language that has been shown to be valid to be used in that language. If not, then you can't. You may not be able to use it. And then if that happens, you just may have to make that very clear in your report. There may be a gap in the data because we're unable to access this key constituency due to language barriers. Okay, that's all for now.